As we started, a challenge that Sigma and any other cannabis lab was facing was that we were dealing with a new matrix, which is basically the combination of the compounds that are in the product that we are testing. So on one hand, cannabis has a very complex matrix. It's not that easy to test because you need to make sure that you are extracting all that you need to test. For example, you are making sure that you are extracting all the cannabinoids that you want to quantify. And on the other hand, you want to make sure that the other compounds present in the product are not affecting, there is no overlap, they are not affecting the results that you're getting. The second side of it, the second challenge here was that there are similarities between testing cannabis versus testing, for example, pharmaceutical products or food products. But the big difference here is that when you look at pharma or food, you see decades of experience in testing those products for quality, meaning that there is enough experience, all the methods are developed, everything has been tweaked and in a perfect shape. But for cannabis, we don't have that history. And we had to start from scratch. So, of course, we had some challenges regarding developing our methods to test cannabis and also validating our methods. But everything became more challenging tenfold with the second wave because now we were not only dealing with the same compounds, with the same cannabinoids and terpenes and let's say even the pesticides that are not supposed to be found there, but we're supposed to test for them. But also now we were dealing with different types of topicals, gels, creams. Again, each with its own different matrix. If you look at the, let's say, edibles, here you are dealing with cookies, with chocolates, and now you need to take a look at fats and sugar, which makes it even more complicated. If you take a look at the beverages, look at the variety that's available right now in Canada and also in some states in the US. We're looking at cannabis-infused tea. We're looking at carbonated beverages. So different types of products, which each and every one of them was a new challenge for a cannabis lab. And I'm happy that during the past 3 years, during the past 2 years, we here at Sigma have taken many steps. We were one of the front runners in terms of developing and validating methods for the new products. And now we have a wide variety of products for different types of edibles and topicals and beverages too. Let me start with myself. I studied engineering. I got a master's in engineering. Then I got my MBA, and I worked for a few years, for 6-7 years, as a management consultant. I'm a serial entrepreneur. I've started different businesses, different companies, and grown a few. A few years ago, with the cannabis legalization in Canada, actually, when it was imminent, it hasn't even happened yet. I joined forces with my partner who has a PhD in analytical chemistry and has been very active in the field of testing instrumentation. And we started Sigma Analytical Services together because while, there was a buzz and everyone was excited about this new opportunity and this new legalized landscape, the majority of the focus was after production, either cultivation or at the next stage, extraction. But we saw a huge gap in the market in terms of the science of cannabis. Here we were talking about, quality control, about testing, about product development, formulation. So that's what we decided to focus on. So we started Sigma. The first lab, the headquarters is in Canada, in Toronto. Last year, we got into a joint venture with a partner in Colombia to set up the first GMP certified cannabis lab in South America because of the opportunity that was there. We are about to close a deal to have our second lab in Canada, which is in British Columbia, in Langley. Actually, the deal was supposed to close a few months ago, but because of COVID, everything was delayed. So this is where we're standing. We are not a typical testing only lab, meaning that it's not only samples in, results out, certificates of analysis out. We have different types of services, including consulting services on formulation, product development, stability studies, cleaning validation. So we are trying to kind of fill the scientific gap in the fast-growing cannabis industry and support our partners with what they need.
I think testing's an interesting one, and I don't think it's really been tackled here in Australia a whole bunch. I mean, everybody's just trying to grow the plant and get to the manufacturing stage. A lot of people are just focused on that. But I don't think anybody is looking at these ancillary businesses like yourselves. I mean, you're not actually, producing anything. You're helping to facilitate the testing and the regulation behind it, because everybody wants a clean, quality plant, whether in the recreational market, but especially in the medical market as well.
Yes.
So can you tell me a little bit about how things are progressing in Canada, as far as the industry as a whole, like where you guys are at? I know you guys are recreational, but before that it was medical. What's the current situation?
What happened in Canada was that the government here legalized in a step-by-step way, meaning that the first wave was October 2018, when the recreational use was legalized and also a broader market was open. But at the beginning, it was limited to dried flower and oil. The second wave, which was in October 2019, then they legalized different types of products, Cannabis 2.0 products. So the doors were opened also to the edibles and beverages and topicals. So there's a huge shift here from different angles. Number one is of course, the natural competition between the new legalized market and the old illegal market, the black market. So while at the first step, looking at dried flower, there was a huge competition because of the history in the market. And of course, there were other products just available in the black market. But when you look at Cannabis 2.0, the whole landscape kind of changes, because here, because of the requirements, from the scientific requirements, formulation, product development, to technical requirements, the space that you need, the machinery, now we see a new field which with a very, very small presence from the black market. So a bigger shift here is that now with Cannabis 2.0 product, the legal market has less to compete on with the black market. From a technical angle, the second wave is much more challenging to us because of the variety of what we'll be dealing with. As we started, a challenge that Sigma and any other cannabis lab was facing was that we were dealing with a new matrix, which is basically the combination of the compounds that are in the product that we are testing. So on one hand, cannabis has a very complex matrix. It's not that easy to test because you need to make sure that you are extracting all that you need to test. For example, you are making sure that you are extracting all the cannabinoids that you want to quantify. And on the other hand, you want to make sure that the other compounds present in the product are not affecting, there is no overlap, they are not affecting the results that you're getting. The second side of it, the second challenge here was that there are similarities between testing cannabis versus testing, for example, pharmaceutical products or food products. But the big difference here is that when you look at pharma or food, you see decades of experience in testing those products for quality, meaning that there is enough experience, all the methods are developed, everything has been tweaked and in a perfect shape. But for cannabis, we don't have that history. And we had to start from scratch. So, of course, we had some challenges regarding developing our methods to test cannabis and also validating our methods. But everything became more challenging tenfold with the second wave, because now we were not only dealing with the same compounds, with the same cannabinoids and terpenes and let's say even the pesticides that are not supposed to be found there, but we're supposed to test for them. But also now we were dealing with different types of topicals, gels, creams. Again, each with its own different matrix. If you look at the, let's say, edibles, here you are dealing with cookies, with chocolates, and now you need to take a look at fats and sugar, which makes it even more complicated. If you take a look at the beverages, look at the variety that's available right now in Canada and also in some states in the US. We're looking at cannabis-infused tea. We're looking at carbonated beverages. So different types of products, which each and every one of them was a new challenge for a cannabis lab. And I'm happy that during the past 3 years, during the past 2 years, we here at Sigma have taken many, many steps. We were one of the front runners in terms of developing and validating methods for the new products. And now we have a wide variety of products for different types of edibles and topicals and beverages too.
Yeah, the edible and the topical market hasn't come to fruition here yet. I was in the I-502 industry in Washington State, and you really saw in the recreational side of the industry all those different, formulations of pretty much anything you can get your hands on. They're putting cannabis into, and really got to see that take shape. Over here, it's still purely medical. So you're just seeing it extracted into an oil and then manufactured into some type of either a capsule or something that can be ingested. But I think that will progress as it starts to open up into a recreational market. But I don't see that in the coming years in this side of the world.
Joshua, if it's okay that I add something here, because let me clarify something. On both passes that we're talking about, whether recreational or medical, we are taking the steps. We are more and more depending on having the cannabinoids extracted out of the plant. Even if you look at the recreational market, you see that the market is moving farther and farther away from the traditional way of smoking cannabis to the new types of products. And even in the medical market, now we are talking about cannabis-based pharmaceuticals. So basically here we are looking at different types of cannabinoids, let's say CBD or THC as an API, as an active pharmaceutical product. So no matter which path you want to take, we are depending more and more on extraction of cannabinoids out of the cannabis, and then purifying them, going from a distillate to isolate and the API. So one of the challenges in the market, no matter if you look at the medical or the recreational side of it, is that technical aspect of extraction and going all the way to get to an isolate or the API to use in the medical products.
And can you dive into exactly what an API is? I think I've talked about this with Craig a few times because he's dealt with the medical field. Can you dive into what an API actually is? Is that just that singularity of that compound and isolating that compound and having consistency behind that?
When you are dealing with pharmaceuticals, no matter if it's a pill or a drop or any type of pharmaceuticals, there is a compound or a combination of compounds which has that medical effect, which is what you're after. However, there are other things found in, let's say, that pill, in terms of what is there other than what you're using. For example, let's say that you go and buy an Advil pill, for example. That API, that active pharmaceutical ingredient here, is ibuprofen. But there are other things there. There are, preservatives and also colors, so things that just make up that pill. So we are not focusing on that. We are only focusing on what has that medical effect. And when you talk about the cannabis-based products, that's specifically the cannabinoids. And this is a new field of science, so the jury is still out. There are terms that we commonly hear, like, for example, entourage effect. Do we need to look at each cannabinoid separately, independently, or combined together? They have a different type of effect. And it even goes farther than that. The jury is still out even about the terpenes. There are different hypotheses here. Number one is that terpenes have no role here. It's only about the cannabinoids. Yeah, terpenes affect the aroma, the scent, or even the taste, but they have no, they take no part in that effect that the APIs have. Another theory is that no, actually terpenes could take part in it too. And if there is an entourage effect, terpenes are part of it too. The third theory here is that terpenes do not directly affect the entourage effect and what the cannabinoids are doing. However, they can accelerate it, they can strengthen it. So I want to emphasize here that the science is not complete yet and much research is being done. But what we know so far is the effect that CBD and THC have. So maybe I'm oversimplifying it, but as of now in the cannabis industry, in the cannabis-based pharmaceuticals, when we talk about the APIs, it's either CBD or THC or a combination of them. However, more research is done, and there are already seeing some signs that maybe CBG also has some effects or CBN has some effects. But what we're focusing on right now in the pharmaceutical side is only CBD and THC.
I think people are trying to do a lot more studies out here from the interaction that I've had with these organizations. They're doing studies on that entourage effect and these other compounds, but I think it's going to take a long time for them to figure all that out.
Australia is one of the front runners actually in that field. If you look at the medical side and the medical effects, they are very active. Earlier in the day, I think it was 2018 or early 2019, we even had some conversations to partner with a few research organizations in Australia, and the universities are very active there. And we still hope that we can also do our part and just collaborate and help them. But to your point, yeah, much research is being done, and we are awaiting receiving more and more results there, especially from Australia.
So I guess that brings me to the recreational versus the medical side of the industry. You've seen the recreational side of the industry really flourish in the last few years, with tax dollars and industry and people making money. But the medical side is just really struggling, I think, because it's taking a long time for them to get their products up and running. And there's not a big market for it. And so I find that these publicly listed companies are really struggling to make income in the short run. Do you think that that's a problem over there or internationally? Do you think there's a market for the medical side of this industry, or are people just the outlook is for the long term for it to go recreational and they're going to make money that way?
I believe that there's a huge market here. I'm not a physician, I'm not a medical doctor. However, during the past few years, I've attended many seminars, and I've listened to lots of these researchers talk, and I've read the papers and the researches. So I think we already see a huge potential, and there's no doubt about that. The only issue here is that this is a new field, so it requires some investment. It requires, by investment, I mean both money and time. So research needs to be done. And what I see right now is that, number one, there's still a little bit of a stigma, even on the medical side. So that's something that needs to be overcome, and that's something that might be slowing things down a little bit. However, despite that, what I have been witnessing in the past few years is that the research bodies, let's say the universities, are very active. They're doing great, specifically in countries like Australia, in Israel, in Czech. We are seeing a ton of valuable activity, and we are just seeing the results, and there's a lot more in the pipeline. But on the other hand, let's not forget that if we are looking at the medical side, if we are looking at the pharmaceutical side, the end goal or the end result here will be having lots of different types of cannabis-based pharmaceuticals, drugs. And look at the history of the other drugs. What happens here? Drug manufacturing, from R&D to production, is very costly. It's very time-consuming. This is why you see a small number of very large multi-billion-dollar pharmaceutical companies kind of driving it ahead, developing new drugs. And this is what must happen to cannabis too, if we want that medical side, that pharmaceutical side, to just get to its potential. This is my personal opinion, but what I'm seeing right now is that one of the reasons behind this slow pace is the United States, because the majority, a large number of these huge pharmaceutical companies are the American companies. So they have the money, they have the research team, they have the capability to do that research and develop those products, but they are either not doing it, or they are doing it very cautiously, very slowly. And the reason is that cannabis is not federally legalized in the US. And the state level legalization is not enough for that. So while I appreciate all that's being done on the research side by the universities, by the professors all around the world, and we are seeing the results, but I think also the pharmaceutical industry needs to get involved a little bit more and invest a little bit more and get more serious about that. And I think one of the roadblocks right now is the federal legalization in the US.
No, that makes a lot of sense. The guys out here that have invested and have those startup companies that have tried to do the medical research, it just seems like their bank accounts keep on getting depleted, and they keep on raising money and more money and more money. You've seen it time and time again, and it doesn't seem like they're going to get to that point where it kind of opens up for them to actually have a market. Maybe in this next wave of legalization and opening up, but it just doesn't seem like they're going to get there. A lot of these guys seem like they're going to go out of business.
Yeah. Unfortunately, that's the reality of the market.
So you guys are starting to possibly look at the Australia market. Are you guys planning to come over here, set up operations and set up testing labs, or?
There are two different approaches here. Number one is that Australia has done a lot in the past 2 years in terms of opening the market on the medical side, and also in terms of research. But as far as I know, according to the latest conferences that I attended before COVID hit and put everything on halt, in terms of production, Australia has not done much. In terms of cultivation or extraction. So basically, it's mostly depending on import. So one of the major exporters here is Canada. No matter what you look at, if you look at the APIs, the isolate, or from dried flower, different types of products here for the medical side. So what happened here is that we saw an opportunity about Canadian companies needing to planning to export their products to Australia for the medical market. But what happens here is that for you to be able to export your product, it needs to get approvals from the Australian regulatory bodies there. So the most important part here is the GMP side of it, because unlike Canada, in Europe and in Australia, GMP is applied to cannabis products too. So here in Canada, it's not mandatory. Only the companies who are having international business or are exporting just follow GMP. One of the requirements under GMP is that the products need to be tested by a GMP certified lab. And while there are many GMP certified labs just testing food and pharma products on cannabis, in Canada, you don't find many of them, because again, it's not mandatory, it's not a requirement here in Canada. There are very few of them, and Sigma is the only cannabis-focused GMP certified lab in Canada. So we saw that opportunity, and what we did was that we got a release from TGA. Basically, it's something like an equivalency for our GMP. So when we got that from TGA, it means that Sigma's GMP certifications is also approved in Australia. We got it recently, just a few weeks ago. So the opportunity here is that if a Canadian company, if a Canadian producer wants to export their products to Australia, they need to have it tested first by a lab, which is approved by TGA, and then they can export it. So Sigma is that option, and we can help in that way. The other side of it, yes, sorry, go ahead.
Go.
The second side of it, what you mentioned, is that about a different type of business expansion, which is maybe the more straightforward way here, which is having operations in Australia. To give you the full picture and be very transparent here, looking at what already exists in Australia, looking at the infrastructure and the labs and everything, I think the best solution, the win-win solution for a company like Sigma and the Australian company here is not for Sigma to go and set up a lab there. No, it's a different type of collaboration. What we can do, what we have already done, not only here in Canada, but also in Colombia, is that we can do a technology transfer. Basically, the common phrase in our industry is a method transfer. So we have the knowledge, we have the IP, we know about what is required from instrumentation to lab requirement, infrastructure, to those methods that I told you about. We have developed our method, we have validated our method. So let's say that if an investor or a company in Australia wants to go and set up a cannabis lab, it will take them at least 12 months from the design to set up to having their methods ready. So if they work with a company like Sigma and do that method transfer and use our experience with the setup and everything, then it can be done in a much shorter span of time. The second way of doing it, let's say that there's a lab in Australia, there's a lab who's been testing, let's say, pharmaceutical products, but now with the cannabis medical market and legalization and everything, now they're interested in testing cannabis products too. Even working on those methods, development and validation, it will take months, on average 6 months, maybe even longer. So Sigma could be their partner. We could just join forces with them. We could do a method transfer with them, and something that should have taken them 6, 8, 9 months, we could help them to get there in 2 to 3 months. That's another way that we could get involved in that market.
So you're looking for strategic partnerships in the region to be able to partner with them and show them your processes and equipment and things like this. Possibly.
Yes. Again, to be very transparent with you, our current expansion plans are in North America, in Canada, and also hopefully in the US if the federal legalization happens. So we do not have any plans as of now to go directly invest in Australia or set up a lab there. But similar to the projects that we already have done in Canada and in Colombia, I think we can have a strategic partnership with Australian partners.
Well, the U.S. is probably the biggest market at the moment, and those states, those individual states, and entering into each one of those states is kind of interesting. When I was there in Washington, I saw a lot of these labs popping up. You know, I think there was about 6 or 8 labs in just Washington State, and they started running into problems because they pretty much were getting paid off to falsify the lab analysis and to say it had more THC content or whatever have you. Are you seeing that in Canada? Are you seeing that in other parts of the North America market?
US is different, you know, because the current situation is that even if, let's assume that even if all the states legalize, it's still very different than federal legalization. What's happening right now is that since you cannot transfer and, you know, ship the products across the state lines, what happens is that each state is like a separate, isolate island. So I cannot generalize. The situation in each state is different. What is being sold in a state has been produced in the same state and tested in the same state. So that's a different story. But generally speaking, yes, we have read it in the news, especially in, I can use California as an example. There were a huge backlash because of what some labs were doing about that. Of course, the producer wants to get the results that they want. Let me take a step back, Joshua, because I think it could clarify the answer to your question. There are 2 sides to testing. One is the efficacy of the product, which is what you mentioned, how much THC is there, how much CBD is there. The second side after efficacy is the safety, in terms of we need to make sure that the product is clean of any contamination, pesticides or heavy metals or microbial contamination. So on both sides, of course, if you only want to look at the business of it, the producer is after its own benefits. So in terms of efficacy, of course, they want higher results. They want higher results for THC or CBD or any cannabinoids. In terms of safety, of course, they want lower results. They want to show that, oh, look, the amount of heavy metals or pesticides or anything in our product is less than the amount which is allowed to be there. So, of course, the labs are under pressure, and sometimes they just take a step back and say, okay, tell me what you want. But most importantly, let's not forget that whatever we're talking about right now applies to food and pharma. So why don't we see the same problem there? Because everything is completely established there. And specifically, I want to talk about the standards. I told you about GMP. The good news is that in Australia it's mandatory. In Europe it is, but unfortunately in Canada it's not. So when you talk about GMP, when a lab is GMP certified, it means that they have everything in place, from validated methods to data integrity to a good review process. So you've already checked each and every box, so you know that whatever comes out of the lab, whatever goes on that result, on that certificate of analysis, is exactly what is there, and nothing has been manipulated intentionally or even unintentionally. So I think that those standards, if they are followed, it will leave no room for any lab or any producer to take advantage of it or be careless about it.
Yeah, I think in the North America market, you're seeing a lot of these producers, processors, manufacturers, all having to pivot their business model, knowing that the international market is going to open up eventually, and them all having to get onto the GMP standardization. And so I think a lot of those guys in the US that kind of were first movers in this industry are going to eventually, they're going to be behind on the 8 ball once everything does, open up to the international market.
You are right, and I assure you that if and when US legalizes federally, there will be a huge shakedown. Many things will change from the business angle, in terms of the business models, in terms of the expansions, to the technical angle, from product development to testing. Many things will change. But let's not forget that there are many smart people, smart investors, smart companies there that are getting ready for that opportunity, and don't think that when it happens they're gonna start from scratch. No, they already have plans for international export. They already have plans for doing it across the states. So on one hand, you're absolutely right, and they are losing that opportunity. Canada kind of turned into a front runner because of when Canada legalized federally. But on the other hand, let's not underestimate the US, and I'm pretty sure they are behind, but they will quickly catch up.
Can you tell me a little bit? I know that regionally in Canada, state by state or territory by territory, it's slightly different regulation. Am I correct on that? On the recreational side?
No. The good news here is that everything for cannabis here in Canada is at the federal level. I'm not talking about sales. I'm not talking about retail. Yes, that's at the provincial level. It's different from province to province. But if you look at the regulations about quality, about types of products, about the required tests, everything is done under Health Canada, which is the federal body who is in charge. So no, here we don't have that issue, unlike the US, which everything is done at the state level.
So it's just the licensing that's province by province.
Again, I'm not talking about sales here. Sales. Let me split it into two parts. If you look at sales is being managed, planned for, licensed at the provincial level. But if you look at other sides of the other parts of the industry, like production, like testing, everything else is being done federally, from licensing to supervision to requirements, regulations, everything federally.
I think it's great that you guys are having this the GMP certification over there, being able to test the product for it to come over here, because the guys that are over here are having to import that product, get it, a sample of that product, get it tested here, and then they can start to find out if that's going to meet the standards, the TGO 93, different things like that, and then they can actually ship it over. So you guys would be able to test it prior, and then be able to ship that product straight in.
Yeah, we are saving them from a very big risk.
Exactly. I think that's I think that standardization could start to, as you get in this, international industry, having a hub or some type of space strategically located, maybe in South America or Central America, where you could start to store and test these things. Is that an outlook for you guys, or just looking for these different operations in Colombia and then in Canada and on the west coast of Canada?
That was the idea behind us getting serious about South America too, because at the end of the day, cannabis is an agricultural product. Yet there are many steps afterwards, after cultivation. Of course, we're talking about extraction, product developments, APIs, but at the beginning, it's an agricultural product. And while we already discussed it, Canada had an advantage because of being a first mover here. But if you look at the climate, South America is the perfect place to do that. And also the investors got serious there. You don't only see cultivation there. You can see that they're doing their extraction up to the point that they even want to export APIs. So the opportunity that we saw there was that we thought that in a few years, when the whole industry becomes more mature internationally, what happens is that some European countries and even maybe Australia will see that it's not really worth it if they want to do the production domestically. And they would say, why should we do that? We can just import. But what's the big concern? Let's say that we want to import a product at a very, very reasonable cost, much lower cost than domestic production from a South American country, let's say from Colombia. The biggest concern here would be the quality of the product. As I told you, efficacy and safety of the product. So what are you going to do? Are you going to take the big risk of paying for shipment of a large batch of the product, and when it arrives in Australia, you test it there and then find out something has been wrong? Or no, you want to have a reliable lab, GMP certified, who knows what they're doing, and have them test the product first at the source, not at the destination. Then they send you the CRA. The CRA is the certificate of analysis issued by a GMP certified lab. And then you can say, okay, guys, now that's good. Now you can ship it. Now you can export it. And you know that when it arrives in Australia, everything has already been checked and it's fine, and you can just go directly to the market.
Yeah, that's what I've been seeing, is that these guys, well, the domestic guys here in Australia just aren't trusting a lot of those COAs that are being issued in these, I guess you want to call them third world countries like Colombia or I guess South Africa, you know, or Panama or Jamaica. And so they're just not sure who is regulated, really, where that product's coming from, how it's being manufactured. They might have a GMP certificate, but they just don't know the quality of the product before it actually gets here. And they don't want to give it to patients when it does get here, if it's that low quality.
That's absolutely right. Just let me add to that another point here is that when you talk about GMP, when you look at it, which is again mandatory in Australia, GMP is end-to-end. So at each and every step, whatever you do needs to be compliant with GMP requirements, including testing. So my point is that let's assume that there is a producer in Colombia which has been audited and has been certified as GMP as a producer. You still need to have that product tested by a GMP certified lab, or else something is missing. It's not enough.
Do you, so I guess before you hit GMP, you have that GACP, good agricultural practices, good agricultural and cultivation practices. Do you see that starting to take shape in the industry in any way, especially on that medical side? You would think that they would want to have some type of standardization before it gets to the manufacturing sector or section of the process.
You are touching an important point here, which is a flaw, but in my opinion is an understandable and justified flaw. Because that's a very good point. Why didn't the regulators get more serious about that? And why didn't they just go directly to GMP and make it mandatory? So, which is of course a very fair point, looking at the more, more safety that could have brought to the market and, different advantages here. On the other hand, let's not forget that this whole concept of legalized cannabis is really new. And there's been so many challenges in terms of regulation. Okay, what should be allowed, what should not be allowed? We already discussed the potency of the cannabinoids. Okay, what level is the maximum? What's the limit for THC? So there were so many moving pieces, so many questions to be answered. And so I think understandably, the regulators decided to take it step by step instead of targeting a big goal which would take them 5 to 10 years to achieve. So they started with a simplified version. I mentioned it a few times already that in Canada, under the Canadian federal regulations, following GMP for cannabis products is not mandatory. But look at our pharmaceutical industry, it's mandatory there. So why not for cannabis? My expectation, my understanding is that following that step-by-step approach, very soon, I don't know, next year or 2 years from now, that would also be expanded to cannabis. And even here in the domestic market, GMP will become mandatory. But I think the regulators decided to, take that step-by-step approach and tackle the smaller pieces of the problem.
Yeah, I think GACP, the agricultural and cultivation practices, it's a set of standards, and processes, but it's not an actual certification. So it's very hard to do, or to prove that you adhere to those practices in your cultivation step of the process. And so I think a lot of people are trying to adopt those practices, but there's no actual certification like GMP, which has standards, and that you're going to get actual, and a lot of the companies are even turning to EU GMP as this standard that's above GMP, supposedly.
Let me make 2 points here. Number one, in Canada, you might find it interesting, but what the producers have to follow right now is actually GPP, good production practices. So again, I see all the flaws, but I think that in the next few years we'll be moving from GPP to GMP. Number two is that you made a good point about EU GMP, but let me clarify something from a testing standpoint. We have a CGMP, current GMP, which is being followed in the US, basically for pharmaceuticals. And we have a European GMP, but basically, let's keep in mind that for production, yeah, we need to take a look at them. For example, if a producer wants to get certified to export their products to Europe, they need to, keep their eyes on EU GMP. But if we want to talk about Sigma, or if we want to talk about generally testing cannabis products for quality, that's a different story, because here we have a GMP standard that needs to be followed, and we cannot just call it EU GMP or anything else. There are two agreements, one mutual recognition agreement between Canada and Australia, another mutual recognition agreement between Canada and the European Union, which basically says that the two sides, on one hand Canada and Australia, on the other hand Canada and the European countries, accept and validate each other's GMP certifications. So meaning that if an Australian company is GMP certified, let's say under TGA, they might need an equivalency, but generally anyone in Canada, any regulatory body or any company in Canada accepts their GMP. No one is going to tell them, no, you don't have Canadian GMP, you need to have that. The same applies to Canada and Europe. So what happens here is that because of that agreement that I told you about, us as a lab, when we have a GMP certificate, it's also approved and accepted in Europe too. So for testing, it's a little bit less complicated than production.
Copy that. Yeah, because I guess it comes down to a company's individual preference if they want that specific certification, especially over here anyway. Some of them are wanting or needing or requiring that it be EU GMP certified.
Again, on the production side, it made total sense. And to your point, they can ask for it. But on the testing side, it doesn't apply to us.
Gotcha. So you guys are looking for strategic partnerships. And if you're wanting to export product to Australia from Canada, you guys are the guys to go to.
Yes, exactly.
To get tested. I also have Craig on the line, and I'm not sure if he wants to add anything or ask any questions, or even off the record. Craig's a biochemist. He works on mainly the extraction side of the industry. Been extracting compounds from natural products for the last 30 years. Just a wealth of information when it comes to CO2 extraction, hydrocarbon, ethanol, anything that involves that manufacturing step. Craig, I just want to let you introduce yourself, and then if you have any questions further on top of what we talked about, feel free to go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Josh. Nice to meet you. I was interested in the as Josh said, I'm analytically based, and I'm not analytically. No, you're analytical. I'm extraction based, so I'm interested in the extraction technologies that are used in the industries that you work with. Is it mainly CO2? Is it mainly hydrocarbon? Is it ethanol? What's the main process that you use in Canada for extraction?
What we see right now is the majority of them are using either ethanol or CO2.
Okay, and you've got processes for residual levels of obviously undesirables like pesticides, like heavy metals with your ICP. Have you got methodologies for residual levels of ethanol or hydrocarbons, propane or butane in the products that people are manufacturing?
Yes, actually, it's mandatory for anything other than dried flower. We have to test it for residual solvents too. So that's under the Health Canada regulations. We have to do that. So yes, we have a validated method, and we test for different types of solvents. From pentane to ethanol to DMSO, different types. So yeah, we have methods and we have to test them, and there are certain action limits, and the results have to be below those action limits to be accepted and for the products to be launched into the market.
Okay, and those will come through the GMP process in Australia, the TGA regulatory controls. There'll be levels that will be acceptable, and that'll be in the C of A.
In terms of the levels, it's not dictated by GMP. So basically, each jurisdiction could have its own list of the solvents and also its own action limits. GMP only just dictates how we should do that, perform those tests, and how we should validate our methods.
Yeah, cool. Okay. I think that's all I've really got, Josh. I think that the Sigma's got a great business opportunity in Canada. It's just that we're behind the eight ball in Australia in the business side of things, and having the analytical done routinely. We just don't have as big a size of industry as you guys have got in the Northern American marketplace.
Yeah, but I think you're on your way, and I think you'll get there also soon.
Yeah.
Ashton, thank you for coming on. Really appreciate coming on late on a Friday. I think what we could do is we can spread the word on those strategic partnerships, and if we do come across investors that want to reach out, I'll put them in touch. I have your email. Also, I definitely can put you in touch with people that are trying to export out of Canada into the Australian market. So I have those connections as well, and I'll push them your way as well. So just wanted to thank you for coming on and spending the hour with us, and it was great having some insight into the Canadian market and where you guys are positioned, and just really appreciate it.
Thank you, guys. It was very nice meeting you. It was very nice talking to you, and hopefully we'll talk soon.
Thank you, Ashton. Appreciate it.